Well, UN-backed report says famine is imminent in Gaza, with more than 1 million people in the besieged territory experiencing catastrophic food insecurity. Alexandra Saieh is head of humanitarian policy and advocacy with Save the Children, and she joins me now. Alexandra, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
This report from the IPC, 1.1 people in Gaza, that's half the population, are facing catastrophic food insecurity. That places us at a phase 5. Does that correctly represent what is going on in Gaza?
Look, what has been announced today is what humanitarian agencies in Gaza have been warning of for months. Half of the population, 1.1 million people, are facing catastrophic levels of food insecurity. What we're seeing is that they're being starved, they're being deprived of food and the basic necessities to survive, just as hundreds of trucks filled with food, water, and medicine are waiting just a few miles away at the border, waiting to get in. This is an entirely man-made crisis. It was completely preventable. And in northern Gaza, which has been almost completely cut off from humanitarian assistance, we are days away from famine.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about whether that phase 5 level is appropriate for northern Gaza, because we know that the famine is more extreme in different parts of the region.
The situation in northern Gaza, I mean, we have run out of words to describe how awful the situation is in northern Gaza. At least 23 children have died of malnutrition and dehydration. And we believe this is the tip of the iceberg, especially in northern Gaza, where we know there is a lot of insecurity, intensity in hostilities, and telecommunications have been unreliable. So we think that we're going to see these numbers accelerate in the coming days.
This report from the IPC comes just days after the UN warned that 1 in 3 children under 2 are suffering acute malnutrition. That number has doubled since January. What impact does this acute malnutrition have on the life cycle of a child?
Look, many children and their families have been forced to live off of wheat, hay, animal food, really anything that they've managed to find just to survive. And what we're seeing is that children are suffering from severe acute malnutrition, including the family members of our own staff. We had a staff member in Rafah tell us that her 1-year-old nephew is now suffering from severe acute malnutrition. And what this has done is weakened his immune system. It's exposed him to other diseases. She described him as having a swollen belly, having irregular breathing, an upper respiratory tract infection, and just constantly vomiting and having diarrhea. And this will likely have lifelong consequences on this child. She told us that she is watching her nephew die. And so the impact is just absolutely heartbreaking for these children. This is why we're calling, and we hope that this spurs action from the international community to push for a ceasefire, to push Israel to scale up and facilitate humanitarian assistance, and to resume commercial goods from entering Gaza. This is what's needed to avert more loss of life.
Should a famine be declared, and if it was, what difference would that make?
Whether or not a famine is declared is not what we should be focusing on, because what we know from other crises is that many people die way before a famine is declared. And we're seeing that happen now. So what we need to focus on is how catastrophic the situation is, and really do something immediately to avert this from getting worse. It's too late for many children, but there are many others that can be saved if there is a ceasefire and we scale up humanitarian assistance.
You mentioned Rafah just before, and the situation of the young boy there, Alexandra. We know that there is discussions around an Israeli ground offensive in Rafah. What would that mean for those people there?
I mean, the majority of Gaza's population now is in Rafah, just a fifth of what is the Gaza Strip. And so if there is an expanded incursion into Rafah, we will likely see mass civilian casualties. People are in crowded streets, living in tents, just in absolutely overcrowded conditions. And we may see a complete collapse of the humanitarian response. I mean, Rafah is where humanitarian agencies are really able to do the most, but the conditions to deliver meaningful humanitarian assistance are not anywhere. And so an expanded incursion into Rafah would be even more catastrophic.
Just finally, Alexandra, have you seen any change to aid coming through? We know that here in Australia there was the resumption of funds for UNRWA. That's been also a situation for other countries. There's also international reports that aid is starting to come through via the air and via those maritime ports. Are you seeing any change as a result of that?
Overall, over the last 2 months, the amount of aid that has entered Gaza has dropped. But over the last couple of weeks, we've seen new routes opened up. Any assistance is welcomed, of course. Any aid is positive, but these new routes are not an alternative to the land routes that have long been established. I mean, we need aid to get in, not tomorrow, but today. And the quickest way for that to happen is to open up the land crossings and let in the hundreds of trucks that are waiting at the border with food ready to go.